Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends, I can't tell you how happy I am to welcome you here in the former German Bundestag in Bonn. About a year ago, we discussed the idea of bringing all of us together, and at that time it was a dream and not a very realistic dream. But sometimes dreams come true, and this dream has come true. 290 people have registered for this conference out of over 80 countries. So this is really as close as we can get to a global conference. We are here to exchange information, to learn from each other, and hopefully to strike strong alliances for a more egalitarian and sustainable world. This conference would not have been possible without the generous financial support of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Sadly, the minister cannot be here today due to parliamentary duties, but he was kind enough to provide us with a video message, which you will hear in a few minutes' time. A great big thank you to the ministry. Our second thank you goes to our steering group, made up of 11 global civil society networks, and you will see their logos on the papers, plus the UNDESA and the ministry. You will also see people from the steering group running this conference and leading many of the sessions. So a great big thank you to this group. Our welcome and thank you goes to all of you here in the room. We appreciate the presence of leaders from civil society, the UN, academia, and many other key stakeholders. I would like to add a special thank you to those about 3,000 civil society applicants who wanted to be here and due to financial constraints obviously cannot be here today. Their dedication and their hard work for our joint cause is really appreciated. We are live streaming our sessions, our plenary sessions, and we hope that many of them can hear and see us. And all of us will go back to them and report about the outcomes of our conference. Let me come back to the dream. I should have said only part one of this dream has been fulfilled. You're sitting here, or we all are sitting here in this room. That's great. But part two of the dream, and that's the more difficult part, is we need to come to conclusions. I hope that we will create a strong and convincing civil society perspective on the post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda. I also hope that we will agree some joint demands and lay down our strategy for making these demands a reality. I have been warned that I should not even try to suggest that we will be of one opinion. I know that we are not. But I also know of a very angry Graça Machel recently who said to civil society, you better get your act together before coming and presenting to the high-level panel. We have to choose what we want to achieve. Do we want just to reflect the broad variety of our opinions, or do we want to change the world? And clearly I'm in the later camp. In order to change the world, as much unity as possible serves us well. So I hope that we create more unity. At the same time, I have to say that we are not stopping groups of civil society organizations to come up with statements which they want to raise and to lobby for sign-on which they would like to achieve. There is nothing wrong with that. At the end of the conference, we will have a joint document which, so to say, records what we have discussed here, but this is not something we will sign you on and hold you accountable for, so don't worry. Let's use this for a creative exchange and for strengthening our civil society. All of us have our own parameters to assess the post-2015 process and its outcomes. I will tell you what mine are. Firstly, we need a credible and effective global strategy to end poverty and inequality and to preserve our planet for future generations. Only doing one will not be enough. Secondly, such a strategy can only be effective if also the North develops their own development policies. Our overconsumption in countries like Germany is not sustainable, and if we think we can just go on like that, then there is not much hope that we will create a sustainable world. I hope that we will make sizable progress towards these, and I look for allies among all of you. Let's work together and make this world a better place. We start with this conference by organizing the conference in a specific way. First of all funded flights are CO2 compensated, so we paid for CO2 compensation measures, and I recommend to everybody who had to pay for their own travel that they do the same. Secondly, the conference will be CO2 compensated as well. Thirdly, and I know some of us won't like that message, catering will be exclusively vegetarian. We know that the meat eaters, all of us, and I'm a meat eater as well, are contributing to unsustainable agriculture. And finally, we provide reusable water bottles, and for those of you who don't come from Europe or from Germany, the drinking water which you get out of the tap is perfectly okay and often tested better than the one you get in bottled water, so don't worry about that. Finally, let me introduce our two moderators. Bernadette Fischler from Beyond 2015, sitting over there, and next to her, Amitabh Behar from GCAP. Thank you very much.
Hello? It works. Good morning, everybody. As Burkhard already mentioned, my name is Bernadette Fischler. I'm here from Beyond 2015, together with my colleague.
Good morning. My name is Amitabh Behar. I'm from the Global Call to Action Against Poverty. I just thought we heard Burkhard say that we have 290 delegates here. The standard way of knowing the different cultures and languages is to probably say good morning in our own languages. So, namaste and shubh prabhat. Can I hear a good morning from everybody? Oh, I just heard the good morning.
Good morning. Well, to start us off, I was wondering actually, Amitabh, what you would expect coming out from the conference. We heard from Burkhard that he expects a lot of creative exchange and new positions. What about yourself?
Thanks. I think that's really a fundamental question for all of us. And I would talk of, to add to Burkhard's dream, 2 or 3 very quick ideas. The way I'm looking at the world, there is a very, very strong narrative of people's anger at the moment. And there's also a very strong narrative of people's aspiration. I think civil society works with common people, with marginalized and excluded groups. It is a historic opportunity for such a broad, diverse group to connect that people's aspiration, people's anger with the post-2015 scenario. And I think it's important that we contribute to it and we shape that. I think if we can use this platform to contribute to that discourse, it would be a successful conference. What about you?
Well, to add to that, I guess, I would hope that everybody who's here from their different backgrounds, from the different countries, has something that they can find here at the conference to take back, be it a new contact, be it a new coalition member, be it some useful information coming out from the thematic sessions, or a position that they find very convincing to sign up to, or maybe also some clarity about further strategic approaches to get involved in the processes on post-2015. So to send us on our journey of these 3 days together at the conference, we will see now a video message from Dirk Niebel, who is the German Federal Minister for Economic Development. Yeah, I think it's going to be over here. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you most warmly to this International Civil Society Conference on advancing the post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda. I would like to thank all those who helped to make this conference happen, especially the organizers from the Berlin Civil Society Center. The German government supports this conference because we are sure that civil society involvement is absolutely crucial for the development of the post-2015 set of goals. So I'm glad that so many people from many different organizations from all over the world have come to Bonn. This diversity is a huge potential. You are giving a voice to those who have the least chance to live in dignity. You are directing people's attention to important challenges such as climate change and fair world trade. These are areas where intergovernmental negotiations have been very slow. Civil society can lend significant impetus to this. We want broad involvement by all relevant stakeholders. Only then will a new international agenda really make a difference. We want to build on the strength of the Millennium Development Goals, especially their clear poverty focus. But the MDGs also have some weaknesses. They did not emerge from a process that was based on participation. They did not give enough attention to important issues such as governance, peace, and security. We want to change this. The United Nations public consultations are providing important inspirations for the drafting of a new global development agenda. We strongly support this. Only an inclusive process led by the United Nations will be able to give the new goals the necessary legitimacy. The civil society perspective is also very important to the high-level panel set up by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. For instance, former German President Horst Köhler, who is a member of the panel, had a meeting with German NGO representatives in December to discuss the post-2015 agenda with them. In my view, 3 things are especially important for the post-2015 agenda. First, the international goals should address all major aspects of inclusive and sustainable development. But at the same time, they should remain manageable and understandable. Second, the set of goals should apply to all countries on a global scale. But at the same time, it must be designed to address country-specific issues. Third, we will continue our efforts to link the post-MDG process closely to the SDG process. We will try to achieve a single comprehensive, coherent agenda. After all, improving people's living conditions and making sure that vital natural resources will still be there in the long term are 2 sides of the same coin. I know that it won't be easy to reconcile these things with each other by defining a comprehensive but also simple, manageable set of goals that works for all countries in the world and also takes account of national conditions. But in my view, this is exactly the key challenge in the current process, and this conference can make an important contribution to this regard. We look forward to hearing your views and finding out where we agree and where your views differ from ours. It is totally clear that we will only succeed in meeting the challenges of the coming decades if we work together. The post-2015 agenda is important for all of us, no matter whether we live in industrialized, emerging or developing countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you inspiring, results-oriented discussions at this conference, and I wish us all a successful road to a new post-2015 agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Nebel. We've heard three very key challenges here. As in, for me, the important challenges what we heard were how do we look at inclusive and sustainable development? The second is about applicability to all countries. And third, a single comprehensive agenda of the post-MDGs and the SDGs. So to take this discussion forward, I'm really delighted to now request Dr. Shamshad Akhtar, Assistant Secretary General for Economic Development, United Nations Development of Economic and Social Affairs, to share her views. Would you?
Good morning and assalamu alaikum, since we are allowed to speak in our language. On behalf of United Nations and DESA, I would like to extend our deep appreciation to the organizers for invitation and also recognize how UN values its interface and partnership and wants to be a part of the solution with the civil society organizations. This indeed is a very timely international conference. UN colleagues and myself are keen to hear perspectives of civil society on advancing the post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda. Work on 2015 has just begun. So civil societies have ample opportunities throughout this and coming year to continue consultation and dialogue and influence the debates. You are being heard. Strategic approaches, conformed consensus based on informed analysis will, of course, pay high dividends. This agenda is global, and yet it has to be adopted at national levels. And as such, engagements you have with governments among this group will be mutually reinforcing. We have learned a lot of lessons. Of these, I touch upon only three most important lessons that are noteworthy. One, unsustainable development has its consequences, as illustrated by ongoing, unprecedented, and protracted global crisis. This has reversed economic and social gains in even the most advanced countries. In this connected and globalized world, what happens in North impacts us in South, and developing countries are faced with additional macroeconomic management and social consequences. Global policy coordination has assumed renewed significance and urgency and calls for comprehensive global action. Two, MDGs served us well. However, with hindsight, the limitations of narrow approach to development are becoming self-evident, and we need to focus on ending global poverty. Past non-inclusive approaches to development have not served us well. Unemployment is all-time high today. Inequalities have grown, both at income and national levels and social levels. Less developed countries and fragile states have become more vulnerable states. Three, in the past, lack of emphasis was placed on the means of implementation, and in current consultative processes, this is assuming significance. Emphasis on implementation is involving debates on governance, rule of law, finance, and accountability and monitoring. Approaches and collaborative mechanisms to ensure right enablers are integral part of the development agenda. Drawing from these and other lessons and recognition of strong and sectoral and growing cross-border linkages has underscored need for integrated approaches. Economic and social as well as environmental issues have to be addressed in an integrated and systematic manner. So policy responses have to be mutually reinforcing in these areas. In this context, sustainability has to be the core of the post-2015 development. consultations are echoing to us that development agenda has to be people-centric. Respecting economic and social rights, women issues are at the center of this. Respect for planetary boundaries is critical as our generation has breached and depleted resources, and we owe it to our future generations to conserve and judiciously use our limited resources to protect environment and biodiversity. In interest of time, let me now focus on 4 points within United Nations. UN has broadened and deepened its consultative process as it launches this work. It is supported by alternate and different institutional mechanisms to hear all of you, involving experts, academia, public, regional forums, NGOs, and civil society, of course, and the private sector. These consultations are enriching and informing the global debates and will indeed filter through in the emerging global agenda. We recognize that partnerships have to move beyond governments to civil societies and private sector at large. Rationale being that civil societies, with their outreach and ear to the ground, as well as specializations, are well positioned to feed into the design of development agenda. However, our expectations is that civil societies could take a step forward to bring stakeholders on a common platform while getting more and more engaged in getting the delivery of services. Evidence has proven that well-equipped, competent, and focused civil society organizations respecting openness and transparency, as well as adhering to fiduciary delivery of services in line with public demands in a cost-effective manner. UN system is gearing itself to ensure policy coordination on the development side, its consistency and coherence. It is trying to ensure UN funds, programs, specialized agencies deliver as one. In parallel, deliberations are underway among the UN membership to strengthen the intergovernmental processes to improve effectiveness and efficiency. While you will hear more about Secretary General's high-level panel shortly, within UN member states have formed their working groups to develop thinking on sustainable development agenda and sustainable financing strategy, and all 60 agencies, including the Bretton Woods institutions, are simultaneously tasked to continue reflections on these topics and other areas which I touched upon earlier. Mechanisms have been put in place to ensure coordination and convergence on agenda. Finally, CSOs have several opportunities and windows of opportunities to continue their engagement on advancing post-2015 development agenda. Besides your involvement in the thematic and national consultations undertaken by different UN agencies and the consultation structured with support of the DESA, Department of Economic and Social Affairs window for NGOs, which has engagement with thousands of NGOs, in the near term, NGOs' contribution would be valued at the forthcoming 4th July ECOSOC meeting in Geneva, which is a ministerial level meeting. With these words, thank you very much.
Many thanks. Next, I would like to introduce you to one of the probably most busy people in the post-2015 arena. Amina Mohamed is not only the special advisor to the UN Secretary General on post-2015, and she will now present to us a message from him. She is also a member of the high-level panel, and today here with her personal mission to bring us the spirit of the spring.
Thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues, and friends. I'd like to begin by thanking Burkhard, the Berlin Civil Society Center, and all the partners for inviting me to this conversation. As always, I welcome any conversation with civil society, but particularly with the depth and the breadth that we have in this room today, because you bring voices that only you can. The rest of it is really quite far. And as we ask for the voices of the voiceless and real representation of the big issues on the ground, there's no better place to be than here, so thank you very much. It is my honour and privilege to read out the message from the Secretary-General, who really has underscored his intentions and commitment to making this post-2015 process as inclusive and transparent as possible. So here goes. I'm pleased to send greetings to this important conference. Your contributions to the post-2015 development agenda are essential. The first order of business must be an intensified effort to reach the Millennium Development Goals, and this with little more than 1,000 days that remain. We can look back on important achievements, but much work still remains. The MDGs will provide an important foundation for the new global development agenda, and success will lend legitimacy to our efforts and mobilize support as we chart the way forward. The United Nations is managing an extensive, transparent, and inclusive consultation. The results, which will include the work of our high-level panel of eminent persons, will inform the recommendations I make later this year to the Member States. Lifting people from poverty and protecting the planet's resources are two sides of the same coin. Both must be at the heart of any framework after post-2015. The new agenda must also address the needs of all sectors of society, with rights and social justice at the core. Your inputs, including the messages you bring from the grassroots, will contribute to an ambitious yet practical and coherent framework. And that is why I look forward to the results of the global conversation being conducted through the World We Want 2015 platform and the My World 2015 Options Survey, as well as the outcomes of this conference. Business as usual is no longer an option if we are to provide well-meaning and sustainable future for the world's expanding population. Your energy and ideas are essential to achieving the transformations we need. And I wish you a productive meeting. That, ladies and gentlemen, concludes the message from the Secretary-General. Thank you.
Many thanks, Amina. Thank you for your offer of engagement and support, and a big thanks to the Secretary-General for his message. We really appreciate that. We are also very delighted and honored to have Honorable Horst Kohler, former Federal President of Germany, member of the United Nations Secretary-General's High-Level Panel on the Post-2015 Development Agenda, and the former Managing Director of the International Monetary Fund. It's a privilege to request Mr. Kohler to deliver the keynote address.
Bring it up a bit. Where does it go up? If it's okay. Huh? I think that's fine. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to see so many of you here coming to Bonn from so many countries and so many different organizations. Over a decade after the Millennium Declaration brought the world together in unprecedented optimism, we need to join again, to rethink our goals, to redouble our efforts, and to renew our common spirit of humanity. By 2015, some of the MDGs will be met, but the challenges we face remain overwhelming. There is no time to rest or to relent in our efforts, and therefore I am happy that with 2.5 years to go, the debate around a post-2015 agenda is taking full speed. I am humbled to be able to contribute to this debate within the United Nations High-Level Panel on the post-2015 agenda. And it is heartening to see the wealth of expertise and passion from civil society that is assembled here today. In our debates, we need to abandon entrenched positions think outside the box, and shed our fears of being overly ambitious. There is too much at stake to be timid or close-minded. The United Nations Secretary General has asked the high-level panel to be, quote, bold and practical, end of quote. It is in that spirit that I would like to address you today and share some of my thoughts about the post-2015 agenda. A word of caution in advance. I was appointed to the panel in my personal capacity. I am not able to speak on behalf of the panel or the German government. Ladies and gentlemen, it should be obvious to all that we cannot continue to live as we did before. While technological advancement and the seemingly limitless entrepreneurial spirit of humankind has brought prosperity and life expectancy in many parts of the world to historic levels, the downside of our current trajectory is evident. Over 1 billion people still living in absolute poverty in many countries. Millions of children are undernourished or unable to attend school. Almost 900 million people are so-called working poor. 780 million people still have no access to clean water. And while the global population is growing faster than ever before, our planet's resources are limited. Our air, soil, water, the whole environment is the very basis for the survival of the human race. And yet, we treat it with casual contempt. Moreover, the challenges facing us have changed in the course of globalization. We are connected to each other much more strongly than was the case 10 or 15 years ago. The effects of what we do or fail to do at one end of the world can be felt at the other end. No country, as powerful and rich as it may be, can in the long run perpetuate its own level of well-being while disregarding the well-being and perspectives of other countries and peoples. And no problem is limited to some countries alone. They are important to all of us, whether we are looking at unemployment or poverty, climate change or financial market stability, pandemics or migration. As simple as it may sound, we are all in one boat. This means that in order to ensure this good future we want for all, we need a global structural transformation. A change which addresses the causes of poverty and inequality on both national and global level. A change which spurs economic growth within our planetary boundaries. The post-2015 agenda should be designed to help us bring about this crucial transformation. But how do we get from here to there? I would like to mention 3 pillars that I believe are necessary to create an agenda aiming at global transformation. First, I firmly believe that nations must work together as equal partners. This does not mean ignoring the political and economic asymmetries between countries that evidently exist, but we need to understand that we can only meet our global challenges through cooperation. We need a paradigm shift towards a true global partnership. We must abandon the artificial division of the world into industrialized and developing countries, donors and recipients. Such concepts no longer reflect today's realities, with emerging economies on the one hand and failing or failed states on the other. The idea that one is a donor while the other is a recipient is not only paternalistic, but obsolete from both a macroeconomic stance and from a political perspective. We have industrialized countries with currently big economic problems, obviously, and emerging economies with vast prospects, but also new challenges. We see societies aging, and we see societies with an ever-growing and demanding young generation and population. When our world is becoming more diverse and more complex, solving our problems as equals is not wishful thinking, but the prerequisite for any lasting solution. This requires the building of trust, the avoidance of double standards in politics, and mutual respect between different cultures and religions. A new paradigm of foreign and development policy could be built around the questions: what is our common interest on this planet? Which challenges unite us? How should we approach them effectively? And yes, maybe we have to go one step further and even ask, what do we owe to each other? The idea of partnership must be reflected at every point in the post-2015 agenda. The spirit of partnership must permeate all goals. I am convinced that such a fundamental change in the way countries cooperate does not diminish, but reinforce national sovereignty. International cooperation offers governments more room for maneuver. It is a necessary, almost indispensable ingredient in the search for enduring national prosperity. This new paradigm of partnership must be based on an understanding what unites us as human beings, irrespective of our cultures or traditions. A global age requires a global ethic. I believe that there are two principles that are able to provide us with such a necessary global moral compass: humanity and reciprocity. The principle of humanity postulates that every human being must be treated humanely and has an inherent dignity. The golden rule of reciprocity, which for thousands of years has been acknowledged in all religious and humanist traditions, promotes mutual responsibility, solidarity, fairness, tolerance, and respect for all persons involved. The quote is, "What you do not wish done to yourself, do not do to others." Second, we have learned something in recent years which was also emphasized at the high-level panel's last meeting in Monrovia, in Liberia. Poverty reduction and sustainable development can no longer be approached separately or in sequence. Many of the challenges at both global and national level are closely linked with resource degradation, the consequence of climate change or other ecological problems. The example of water shows this indivisibility of ecological and social challenges. The access to water and the right handling of wastewater has implications for the health of young children, just as it has for the livelihoods of small farmers or even for the security of whole nations. For us, this means that we need one agenda which combines poverty reduction and the three dimensions of sustainability: economic, social, and ecological. The decades-long divide of our world, and yes, also the civil society world, into a sphere dealing with sustainability issues and a sphere dealing with human development issues has to stop. It is crucial to achieve an integrated SDG-MDG framework. That's at least my approach to this debate. Third consideration, and following from the previous points, we must recognize that the majority of challenges and the most difficult ones have a global impact, and we must tackle them together. This means that a post-2015 agenda must be global in scope, i.e., it must be relevant to all nations on this planet and identify possible contributions for all involved. And we are all involved. You might have observed that I do not use the phrase post-2015 development agenda, as it is mentioned in the title of the HLP, because I do not think we should pretend that it is only the developing countries that have a problem. I'm calling it global agenda, and I think we are doomed for failure should the new framework not address the different responsibilities that each country has in the south and the north, the east and the west. And those responsibilities go far beyond the realm of development policy. It means that we must all contribute something, whether in our national policies or at the international level, through fair and equitable regulation or by creating a better and more just global governance system. What does this mean in concrete terms? I try at least. What would such a global agenda imply for an industrialized country like my own? On the one hand, we need to focus on enablers for development in the international economic and political system to a far greater extent than it has been the case with the current MDG 8. To name just a few, we cannot talk about food security without also talking about the regulation of international financial markets, for food speculation can contribute to price hikes in food. We cannot talk about reducing poverty without also talking about the existing unfairness in our international trade system. We cannot talk about peace and security without talking about small arms control. We cannot talk about land degradation without talking about the international climate regime. The post-2015 agenda needs to take into account the provision and protection of global public goods and needs to hold each country responsible for their contribution to these international enablers. Maybe we can even install a system where countries hold each other accountable, for example, through a peer review mechanism at the United Nations. Let us not lose hope that a more equitable global governance regime is possible. Allow me to make a short remark about an idea that made news recently here in Europe, in Germany. President Obama voiced his support for a transatlantic free trade zone between Europe and the US. I think it is worthwhile to pursue such an idea, but I'm deeply convinced that we need to spend even more political capital and to attach even more importance to finally finishing the Doha round and establishing a development-friendly international trade regime. That is the priority for me, at least. In addition to contributing to international enablers or global public goods, industrialized countries in particular need to have a look at their national policies and realize how they influence development in other parts of the world. Their economies have to undergo a structural transformation as well, in line with the global structural transformation. At the core must be the principle of sustainability in all its ecological, economic, and social dimensions. Our production, consumption, and also financing patterns must become more sustainable. What food do we eat and how is it produced? What means of transport do we use? How do we produce and use energy? How is our financial system designed? Is it people who are there for the money, or money which is there for people? Governments have to create the conditions for a shift to an environmentally sustainable resource use and socially equitable policies. The so-called advanced countries must take the lead here. These countries can and should show that such a shift is possible and makes sense. It is their transformation that can make room for development in other parts of the world. In the long run, I think we have to find new ways to define well-being. We must overcome a fixation on material dimensions of welfare and growth as an end in itself, and turn to meaningful values embedded in a concept of well-being which includes factors such as the quality of life, opportunities, health, education, as well as cultural factors such as empathy and a new spirit of togetherness in our communities. The former head, and I'm sure you will know him, the former head of Greenpeace International, Paul Gilding, says, and I quote, "The earth is full. We have to accept that the only way forward that is acceptable to any of us is to spread the resources we have more equally around the world." End of quote, Gilding. This may mean changing our current lifestyles in the so-called advanced countries. And the affluent countries must take the lead in this. But let me be also clear. Developing countries and emerging economies must also accept responsibility for global well-being, the global common good. They must also be part of this structural transformation I am talking about. I am sure that everybody in this room has a long list of important issues that are crucial for development, issues we want to see tackled in the new agenda. But allow me to just mention one of them, which seems especially pertinent to me: the issues of perspectives for the youth. A simple look at the numbers shows the dimension of this challenge. Africa is already the youngest continent in the world, with a median age being 18 years. Over the next 20 years, Asia's labor force will increase by 350 million young people. In Africa, it is about 400 million. In light of these unambiguous numbers, it is a duty for all of us to work as ambitiously and as rapidly as possible to create opportunities for young people and to make the vast natural resources in developing countries a blessing, finally, for its local people, rather than once more a curse, which happens so often in history. If we fail to address this challenge, peace and security, not only in these regions, could seriously be at stake. I had the chance to visit Liberia at the beginning of January and to meet not only with Liberian entrepreneurs, civil society, but especially also with many young people there. In all my talks, these very clear priorities emerge from the young people in Liberia, and I can also say from Africa on the whole. They hope for strong growth, economic growth, for education, for participation and employment. They hope very strongly for this. And I feel that is encouraging because they have still a positive vision about their future. We know there is no quick fix or a silver bullet to create jobs, but we know the building blocks to make growth more inclusive in poor countries, more job intensive and more sustainable. Above all, investing in education and vocational training. Second, harnessing the immense potential of agriculture, which is not yet done. Third, moving decisively towards green growth. We talk about leapfrogging. Fourth, creating more value addition in developing countries by building up a manufacturing sector to transform natural resources wealth into benefits for the local population. And last, at least in my little list, but not last in the sense of importance, recognizing the important role of women in making a difference. That is, in my view, the most important building blocks. I am confident that the eradication of poverty is within our reach, should national governments prioritize such transformational policies. Therefore, I am advocating in the high-level panel that a goal on employment be included in the new agenda. Trickle-down approaches, at least, have not worked. So it is time to put the issue of jobs and perspectives for the youth on the top of our agenda. Ladies and gentlemen, if we want a post-2015 global agenda along these lines, an agenda which really makes a difference, then we must all work together on this. Actors at all levels of action, the state, private sector, civil society, and every individual must take responsibility. It must be a movement. Every stakeholder is important. This can't be an agenda for politicians. This has to be an agenda for and of and for the people. It requires effort and commitment from every single person. The goal is global change, which ultimately helps create well-being, inclusion, and a more equitable world, which is inhabitable not just for our generation, but for the generations to come. Everybody must take up their part of this responsibility and make their contribution. Politics is important in designing the framework. It is important. The private sector is important as a driver of innovation, as an employer and generator of resources. But you in civil society have a special role to play. You must motivate and, if necessary, pressure your governments, your societies to create this framework, whether in the north or the south or in between. You must demand the right to cooperate on these policies. You must ensure that the interests and priorities of the people are articulated and heard. You must demand transparency, accountability, and participation. Demand it. I am happy to note that many of the points I raised today are also mentioned in the post-2015 discussion paper of VENRO, the Federation of German Development NGOs. You have the power to move your governments to action. Make an effort. You can make things possible beyond short-term interest of profit or legislative periods. And this brings me to my conclusion. What is important now is for us to reach a consensus which makes a transformational agenda possible. Such a consensus will not be easy to achieve. And when we will finally have an agreement for our framework, of course, there will be disappointment, for not every important issue will be able to be reflected in our new global goals. Otherwise, we end up with an overloaded Christmas tree full of ornaments, but possibly not beauty. Yet, the beauty of a new agenda will depend on its simplicity as well as its transformational power. It will be up to you and me and every one of us to help formulate an agenda that really makes a difference. The high-level panel of which I am part will not produce all the answers to the many questions, but I hope that me Amina and our fellow panelists will have the courage and wisdom to come up with something really bold and practical, as the Secretary General has asked us to do. I wish us all that this conference will be a strong contribution to an agenda of global transformation, an agenda that truly delivers on changing the future of people and planet for the better. Good luck, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for sharing your views on how to achieve a global transformation. For me, I heard that very much at the center of this is cooperation, collaboration between equal partners, based on fairness, based on shared responsibilities, and based on solidarity. This conference is also based on the spirit of interaction, and in this spirit we would like to invite 2 questions from the floor, and with your permission to have 2 short questions, please, and then 2 answers. Should we take it? And 1 here. Okay, so we will take a question from here and then from the lady in the back. Thank you.
I would like to thank the Berlin Civil Society for this international gathering, which is very important to the all people. And what took my attention is the fact there is no mention for the countries. So the sponsors of this conference, considering the whole world, the whole earth is one nation. I looked under my name. There is no Palestine. I'm from Palestine. There is no Poland. There is no German. There is nothing. This is a good thing, in fact. Second thing I would like to ask His Honor, former President of Germany, that you mentioned if we don't make that, we can't make that. You mentioned that we cannot make world peace without, for example, I think, stopping the arming. In my point of view, this is a great point, but also to many countries in the world, including some countries in the Middle East, we cannot make peace without ending occupation. And I am a Palestinian, and ending our occupation is a great goal for I think, for many people around the world. That's my point. Thank you very much.
Would you just please also share who you are?
My name?
Palestina.
Your name?
My name is Hilmi Salem. I am from Sustainable Development Research Institute in Bethlehem, Palestine.
Thank you very
Occupied
much.
Palestine.
Thank you. Let's take the second question as well, and then maybe we can take the answers together.
Hi, I'm Shannon Kowalski with the International Women's Health Coalition. Thank you very much for your comments. It was interesting to see you take a transformation approach. And one question for you is, how do you reconcile simplicity with transformation? The challenges that you described are indeed very, very complex, and I don't see how we can do that through a reductive, goals-based agenda. So your thoughts on that? The second thing is I was rather disappointed to see women's roles relegated to a footnote in your comments, and given the fact that now in 2013 we're seeing a major backlash against women's rights to control their bodies, women's rights to participate equally in society at all levels. The violence that we face is increasing, and our role within development is not fully recognized, including our role as unpaid carers and the contributions we make to overall social well-being. So I would love your thoughts on how we can make sure that women's rights are integrated throughout all of the approaches that you outlined.
Thank you. So quickly, your thoughts on women's rights and occupation?
Well, I totally disagree that I mentioned women in a footnote. I'm sorry. I made clear in a very concrete context how to bring forward jobs and perspectives for the young people in developing countries with women's participation. Without women's participation, it will not work. And we have enough evidence and studies which demonstrates if we would have done it earlier to let women participate in political decisions efforts, we would have come earlier to better results. So I beg your pardon, I don't buy your point that I didn't mention women, and I'm sure Amina will say here at the discussion, women is at the top of our agenda. Second, that was a political statement about the future of Palestine. It is no doubt that the solution for this conflict is a need to have a positive view and perspective for peace, prosperity for all people in the world. And we just have to raise questions in this context. And therefore, I take also your statement as a voice which makes us aware of that. I mentioned in this context because I'm so sad, because the small arms trafficking and equipment, for instance in Africa, is a major reason for conflict and disaster. We could stop it earlier, but there's obviously no commitment, no resolve in political circles, neither in the United Nations, how I see it, nor the G20, to tackle this point, because it's a very concrete point, small arms trafficking and trade. We need to have a better regulation for international financial markets. The stability of this system is not yet made secure. But if we tackle financial markets regulation, we can also tackle the regulation to avoid this huge trafficking from small arms. That's my conviction. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. And I'm sure Mr. Köhler will be here also after this plenary for further comments and questions. We continue in an interactive spirit. We are now, I'm glad to invite a panel up to the floor, led by Joanna Kerr, the Chief Executive of Action Aid, and she will be joined by Amina Mohamed, by Jara Pietryczowski de Oliveira, and by Archbishop Ndungane, I hope, and Mr. Dirk Messner.
Okay. Good morning. We're supposed to have a bit more passion, I think, in this conference, we heard. So I hope that this next session we've got pastors and actors and activists and academics, and I'm sure we're going to become slightly more passionate. But so far, what I'm hearing is a lot of general agreement about the way forward. So let's see if we can get more of this going. We're running a little bit behind in terms of the agenda, but we have been told that we have 45 minutes for this panel. And yes, my name's Joanna Kerr. I'm with Action Aid International. It's my privilege to have been invited by the Berlin Civil Society Center to chair this. And I think we're going to hear 5 minutes from each of our panelists. And then we really will open it up to the audience to get your views. This is about civil society participation for the future of a global agenda, and to hear your voices will be most critical. We will stick to the order that's in our program. So, Amina, yes, you are probably one of the most busy traveling individuals on the planet, but it's important to say that you've had many important hats. You're now the special advisor for the post-2015 development planning, but you've been the CEO and founder of the Center for Development Policy Solutions, adjunct professor for Columbia, but you've also been the special assistant to the president of Nigeria. It's a privilege to hear you speak again. So share with us, I guess from your chair, if you like, 5 minutes.
5 minutes to talk about a lot that's happened since this time almost last year. And when we started last year, there was an awful lot of confusion. That's what most people told me when we started this work. It's very confused. Now we talk about complexities and different layers of the process itself. I think the first thing sort of to perhaps bring some more clarity to for the whole post-2015 development agenda and the process of consultations and planning is that one see it as sort of the chapeau that we hope to conclude with in 2015, and that the many strands, and I can see there's quite a few there on the backdrop, we hope to have that convergence at the end with the bold and ambitious and practical development agenda. And I think we do have not to tweak the MDGs, but it is very clear that as minimalistic as we might have thought the MDGs were, in many, many countries, they have not been achieved. We will go far in the next 3 years if we accelerate in this last 1,000 days, but we won't quite make it because many have lost the gains they had through the various challenges of conflict and otherwise. So building on the MDGs is going to be absolutely essential to give us that legitimacy of the post-2015. And that is a piece of work that's continuing. There are gaps that are being addressed, and I think one of the major strands of that is going to be how we're going to improve on the data and statistics to give us a much better baseline for when we transition to post-2015, so that we are much better at getting a hold on the inequalities that we talk about. And as we have frequently said, when we're discussing women's rights, human rights, women's rights, same thing. But we have 50% of our population that isn't being invested in, and that means we're flying on half an engine. We're not going to go anywhere. And that has to be taken into context. And we have to stop saying youth and women. Youth are women. And this worries me. You know, we can say especially women, or we can make a big effort and push to know that we need to have that, remember that they are there. But I think that the minute we start to say it is farmers and women and everything and women, I think, you know, we're an integral part of that, and we tend to start to marginalize ourselves on a table that says, well, we've dealt with women. No, we haven't. They're a part of the whole, and it's an underscoring of that. So I think the strands that will come together will also be the consultations, the high-level panel, and the high-level panel work is an input into the Secretary-General's report that reflects the next development agenda, which at the core has sustainable development. So the idea that we have an MDG process and an SDG process really we need to disabuse ourselves of that. Mm-hmm. There is a post-2015 development process with sustainable development at the core. How are we going to respond to those three dimensions? They're not pillars. They need to be thought about in an integrated way: economic, social, and environment. That's going to be a challenge structurally for everybody, for the United Nations, for donors, for countries, for civil society, that in the same room we are speaking to all these three issues in the context of trying to eradicate poverty and empower a next generation, starting from yesterday. The others are the number of Rio outcomes, and these Rio outcomes are important because the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's begun, needs to be engaged with. There is space that's been widened for civil society's engagement, but I think there are other things there that we need to make sure we don't lose sight of. One is the financing for development. No matter what we come up with, if we don't address the means of implementation and what is available to us now in terms of thinking beyond the boundaries that were set with what is, as our colleague from the high-level panel talked about, obsolete, we need to think about that. Mm-hmm. We need to think about the technologies and how to have access and make them much more. That is an outcome. But the coherence of what we say with sustainable development. We have a roadmap, which we hope, I noticed some of the objectives of the conference is to have much more clarity as to where do you come in, where is this all beginning and ending. Clearly in September will be a watershed moment where we take stock and we look forward within a framework of reducing from that Christmas tree some more clarity to what the specifics are that we're going to respond to over the next year and a half. But we do know that September 2014 will be another opportunity where major decisions around SDGs, the high-level political forum, would be taken, taking us into 2015. So there's much work to do, but I think that out of this meeting, what we would welcome is a lot more prioritization, a lot more agreement on what the consensus is around the narrative that we are responding to today. It has to be more than just bigger and better MDGs, but a response to today's challenges, and see the specifics of how we will continue to drive the next development agenda with it, but not, as they say, take the whole lot and then we end up sinking the battleship.
Great. Thanks very much. I think that gives a good opening and a framework for us to engage with. I'm now going to turn to my left to Yara Pichowski de Oliveira. Brazilian, has been with INESC, the Institute for Social Studies, a researcher, an activist, has played a key role on indigenous rights, on sustainability, on environmentalism, but not least of all, you're also an actress. So it's good to know that there's creativity in this space. So please, if you take 5 minutes to share with us your views.
Thank you very much. Thank you, all you, to be here, and the invitation make me very happy and in such a relevant debate. Well, I'm not actress here. I will try to do and use my skills on actress, but anyway, and my challenge is to take this 5 minutes short. And I wrote, just because I love to fly a little bit. But I would like to start pointing out a few things that there are much more questions than proposals toward 2015 goals. First of all, I would like to say that the so-called MDGs were a scandalous reduction of an entire framework of international treaties and conventions that started since 1992. In the so-called UN social cycle. According to Social Watch reports, the goals were not reached as they should. We can have something, maybe, in Brazil, basket family policy that brought people to be consumers, but not equality. We didn't get anything. Poverty is done, but there are inequalities that is increasing. 20 years after this social cycle, we faced with a step back in the framework of human rights, resulting from a reversal of values and the way in which the power is structured and in and out the nations. The international governments and international organizations have become hostages of corporations and capital. Rio+20 was an example. It came up with concepts of green economy, for example. What means green economy? Commodification and financialization of nature and life. Clear way to weakness the multilateralism. United Nations is becoming privatized, among other problems. How can we assess this problem? How can we change this real process in the way how we are seen? The People's Summit in Rio de Janeiro in 2012, last year, denounced the results in Rio+20 and the COPs on climate change and biodiversity are a step back in relation of human rights, in particular women's face on the climate change. I'm sorry, I disagree. We need to talk about women, we need to talk about gays, we need to talk about all those who are still being discriminated. Mm-hmm. How could we make the new concepts of sustainable development goals in fact, take the richest countries, the richest corporations, those who are defining the rules of our governments. The chapter of Rio+20 did not provide any concreteness of these issues. We continue with the need for defending CDBR principles, named the common but differentiated responsibilities. How to deal with it? How could we deepen the sense of democracy while respecting the cultural and political diversity, but without giving up human rights and their universality? How could we radicalize democracy in a world of permanent and growing inequality of gender, race, sexual orientation, social and environmental aspects? How could we change the power access to make indeed a world plural and multilateral? The biggest problem in the world is excess of wealthy in the hands of few, and not poverty. We know that. How can we get the richest, the corporations, not the poorest? They are not the problem of the world. How could we ensure decent and sustainable work for every human being in the world, where the youth unemployment has been growing in all over? Look at Europe right now. The problem of the indignados, all this uprising coming up in our world. And finally, just to start our debate, who is paying the bill of this unequal world? This inequality is given by a capitalist system and a logic that survives it. How could we change the pattern of production and consumption so as to constitute other models of sustainability and other ways of living and relating? How could we include the nature as in the field of rights? The world nowadays has a deficit of social justice, exploding inequalities increasing before our eyes, corruption and misappropriation of public money, regressive tax system operating on a logic where the poor pay more than the rich. My country is the king of this. How could we make our solidarity? How can we increase the value of commons, the public space, and the global responsibility? How can we make it prevail? In addition to ensure fairness, peace, security, just all these beautiful words that we've been saying every time, how can we make it real? How can we mobilize people in order to press our governments, to press international arena, to push and move on this direction? And finally, how could we ensure equity of gender and race relations, in particular for women and LGBT, among others, who suffer discrimination? Moving toward post-2015 agenda means facing these issues urgently. There is a Brazilian song that says, "As if there were no tomorrow." Thank you. Let's go to the debate.
Wow, fantastic. 9 very, very hard-hitting questions. If we can answer even 3 of them, we will have achieved something. I now hand the floor over to Archbishop Ndungane. He was indeed a political prisoner in the 1960s, but in 2000, then he became the Archbishop of Cape Town in the post-apartheid era. And he's my countryman. I'm a Joburger, he's a Cape Townian. But in 2006, you founded Africa Monitor, that plays a really critical role both in terms of monitoring the fulfillment of aid donor promises and recipient country. I understand as a pastor you want to speak from the podium, is that correct? So I can move here and you can stand there?
I think
You'll stay there? Okay.
Since my colleagues have been sitting.
By all means, welcome.
Moluen, Dumelang, Hotsong. A hard act to follow. The post-2015 process is probably one of the most important global engagements currently taking place alongside the UN Conference on Climate Change and Sustainable Development. I believe that these global dialogues have potential to redefine the destiny of humanity and indeed lead to a better, equitable world. In response to the clarion call from the UN General Secretary, African civil society have been conducting extensive consultations with grassroots communities through the work of African Monitor, Accord, GCAP, Oxfam Africa, national NGO coalitions, and over 100 other partners that belong to the Africa CSO Working Group on post-2015. My only intention today is to share with you emerging results from these consultations so that you understand what a relevant and effective post-2015 development agenda must entail from the perspectives of ordinary citizens. I cannot overstate the critical importance of listening to the wisdom that emerges when the poor begin to define the future they want to see. 5 things stand out for me. First, the post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda must decisively address inequality. Sustainable development in the post-2015 world must concern itself with one primary objective: the need to drastically shift from an unjust, unequal world towards an equal world, where global resources are shared by all and benefit all. There's plenty of evidence to show that we live in a grossly unequal societies, and that the cost of this to humanity and the sustainability of world resources is significantly high. The cost is not only in terms of resources being plundered by conglomerates, or war or famine that results from resource scarcity for the majority and access for the privileged. There is also a significant cost in the loss of morality, spirituality, and dignity in all societies. Unequal societies promote excessive binging by a few at the cost of the many, thus resulting in the perpetuation of greed, disregard for human life, disregard for the environment we live in, and institutionalized disregard for human dignity. The post-2015 declaration of the Africa CSO Working Group calls for the elimination of inequality and discrimination in all its forms, including gender-based discrimination. The particular multiple burdens faced by women and girls, including sexual violence, limited access to education and skills, should be an urgent priority for our world. If we are significantly and seriously to address inequality, then a number of things need to be transformed in the current world order, including economic systems, governance systems, and social systems. And this leads me to my second point. The post-2015 Sustainable Development Agenda must promote a transformative economic agenda that provides economic opportunities for the poor, ensuring integration of ordinary citizens and marginalized communities in the production and growth process. This principle is best explained using an anecdote from one of the most effective citizen consultation methodologies African Monitor uses, called poverty hearings. As we travel the African continent seeking to understand what works in communities and what does not work, it became clear that one specific thread was emerging. This was a voice throughout the continent which was saying, we do not want handouts. We want access to opportunities and an enabling environment where we can generate sustainable livelihoods. What does this mean in real terms? It means that investments must be made in productive sectors that absorb the skills of the poor. It means that education systems must be geared towards promoting the capacity of the poor to function as integrated contributors to economic productivity. It means increasing access to productive assets and productive infrastructure for the poor. In short, it means making the poor active contributors of economic development and growth. It is also important to increase economic and social resilience of communities. This would deal with building citizens' capabilities to adapt to external and internal shocks in the social and economic systems. Third, the post-sustainable development agenda must give power back to citizens to effect decisions in their own lives. A citizens-driven democratic governance system must be the foundation of the post-2015 governance system if it is to be truly transformative and sustainable. I'm not simply talking here about consulting citizens or some other superficial process like that. Evidence from the work of African Monitor over the years shows that ordinary citizens want to be able to effect decisions that affect their lives. They want meaningful engagement about how their monies are spent by those they have placed in government. They want to inform strategic and planning decisions about the development path in their countries. They want to share the power they have bestowed upon those elected, especially because those in government have been found wanting when it comes to making decisions that benefit the majority. Fourth.
1 minute.
Right, the fourth and the most important.
Okay.
The post-2015 governance agenda must deal decisively with corruption and the inefficient use of resources by the political and business elites. Moderator, African Monitor, and this is very critical, is currently running a mobile campaign with young people in 10 African countries, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Botswana, and South Africa. This campaign is meant to seek the aspirations of the generation for post-2015. The results coming out from this work are astounding. The strongest and most frequent message is that democratic governance is the area that concerns young people the most. Within this, these young people are calling for an end to corruption and corrupt governments. Let me just quote two statements from two young ladies.
Okay, fair enough, and then you wrap.
One, and I'll be done.
Yeah.
One lady from Kenya stated in her SMS, quote, "I dream of an Africa devoid of prejudices, an Africa that fully embraces democracy and shuns selfishness, an Africa free of debt and where no one lacks food, homes are safe. Children go to school instead of toiling in the fields. I dream of Africa where the libraries are full and the slums are empty, an Africa where education is a right that everyone attains with or without money. I want an Africa that gives birth to the greatest innovations." And the last one is a young lady from Uganda who says, "I dream of an Africa which will be free of corruption by 2016. I stop there.
Beautiful.
Moderator.
Beautiful. Thank you very, very much. And to bring those gorgeous voices into the space was really important. Dirk, I hand it over to you. You have the last word on this panel. You are a renowned academic. You're with the German Development Institute, and you've been doing lots of work on climate change and good governance and globalization. So share with us in 5 minutes your views.
Yeah, we'll try to be as brief as possible. And the first sentence which I would like to formulate is that I'm happy that we do have this kind of debate and that we do have this kind of reflection on bold and ambitious change. Because I remember a conference where I was invited only 1 year ago, OECD, DAC committee, Hildegard Lingnau, you're sitting here on my right-hand side. We had the first debate on the post-MDG process, the post-2015 debate 1 year ago in the DAC context. In the discussion, as I remember, it was very frustrating. I tried to develop in this workshop a bold and ambitious new agenda for global development, and most of the participants developed a very incremental kind of reflection on how we might change one MDG goal or half of an MDG goal. So it was very, very incremental. It was not at all ambitious. So I'm very happy that we move into a new direction now. This is fine. And I agree completely with Professor Köhler, who mentioned that it's about global transformation, actually. And we are far away from being on track. But in several dimensions, we are making progress. And we need to have clear the different arenas we have to think about. And listening to all of you here, I see that we need to be clear in 3 different arenas and then try to bring our kind of reflection down to targets and goals which are specific. So the first arena of the great transformation is and remains poverty reduction, which is included or which is linked to inclusiveness issues, obviously, And if we look at the global poverty map, poverty is clearly linked with governance issues, civil society engagement, civil war situations. So this is the first big cluster. MDGs, poverty reduction, governance, war, fragility, this is one big cluster. And we need to get indicators and goals out to manage the transformation for these poorest people on earth. And this is still a very important challenge. The second big arena of transformation is different because it is about new wealth. If you look into the global economy, we do have a new global middle class emerging in many non-OECD countries. In a few years only, most people belonging to the global middle classes will not any longer living in the OECD world, they will be living in non-OECD countries. So the other side of the continuum, poverty reduction is the one hand, the other side is managing this new wealth, the new global middle classes. This is linked to issues like urbanization. We will see 6 billion people living in urban areas in 2050. We do have 3 billion people living in urban areas currently. If we would have an urbanization, business as usual, high carbon, resource inefficient, we would move into all these environmental crises. So urbanization, how to manage it is very important. The energy consumption globally will double during the next 2 decades probably. This is driven by socioeconomic development and growth in many non-OECD countries, which is nice and wonderful, but it needs to be low carbon, it needs to be resource efficient, it needs to be energy efficient, and this is key now. So this is the second arena. It's different from the old MDG debate, because the old MDG debate was on poor countries and the poorest people, and this remains key. But on the other hand side, this new wealth and these new global middle classes are very important. We need to be engaged with this kind of issues also. So it's resource efficiency, decarbonization, sustainable development. This is the second arena of transformation. Exactly. And the third arena of transformation is, and this has been mentioned by Professor Köhler, I think very clearly, we are living in the century of the global commons, and therefore a culture of international cooperation, this was your point also, is absolutely crucial. Mm-hmm. So global commons imply, we have been talking already about international financial markets, and beyond that, the most important thing is we need to define a safe space for global development within the planetary boundaries. We need goals for that. We need goals to stabilize these global commons, and this is a huge challenge. And this needs much more global cooperation. Mm-hmm. And we need to invest in global cooperation in a multipolar world now. I think this is as bold as inventing the human rights, as we have been bold when human mankind invented democracy, when we tried to abolish slavery. And now it is about creating a culture of international cooperation to stabilize and save our global commons, which are the basic ground for all the processes of global development. So these are my 3 arenas of transformation. This is my kind of narrative, which is coinciding with many of the arguments which we already have been listening to. And of course, then in these arenas, we need to bring this down to indicators, to concrete goals. But the main direction is important. The narrative is important. And I'm happy to see that we are not only talking about incremental change. Thanks.
Great. Very good. Thank you very, very much to all of the panelists. I'm now going to open it up. But what it's great to hear is that, in fact, in a year's time, the agenda has moved forward. That we are talking about much bolder and much more transformatory change than we have before. And there seems to be a level of shared analysis of the problems, but the extent to which we will be sharing an analysis around the solutions. We've heard many things about this post-2015 global agenda around being universal, tackling inequality, the sustainability agenda that is new in this era that was not there, and this focus now on the global commons. But we've also talked about the centrality of human rights and most definitely the centrality of women's rights. But how do you create an agenda that's not just universal but also context specific, right? Now, what is of some concern, which we've heard, and it's of great concern to many of us, is what is the role of civil society, not only in defining this agenda, but also protecting this agenda. And we heard from Minister Kohler to say that the power is with you. It is and it isn't, in the sense that at this very same time, where this is a very open and transparent space, in fact, the space for civil society is shrinking. And governments are working together to create a much less democratic space for the work that we do. And so while a new agenda will only depend upon civil society and the power of people to hold governments and corporations to account, at this very moment, it is our power and our enabling environment that is shrinking. So unless we bring in accountability and the mechanisms by which civil society and people and voters and citizens can actually hold the power to account, hold the rich to account, none of this will be achieved. It will be absolutely elusive. So we have to bring this agenda of democracy, anti-corruption, enabling environment for civil society, freedom of expression, freedom of the press into this space. It's not enough to say that social media and Twitter will do it. It will not. And the extent to which the UN has a critical role to play, and the extent to which donor agencies have a critical role to play in terms of funding, in terms of space, all of these pieces. So I just needed to bring that in. It was under the surface, but it needed to be explicit. So now I want to open it up to the audience. We've been given about 15 more minutes, and it would be wonderful. Is that right? 10 more minutes. Okay, here we go. So 10 more minutes. So what I think we do is we take a collection of comments, and then I will allow 30 seconds of panelists to just summarize. But you're all here for the whole conference, correct? Yes. So, and I understand in terms of the technology, you have to press the button, wait 2 seconds, say your name, say your country. So I have here to start.
Yes, can you hear me? Yeah, Ed Barry with the Sustainable World Initiative out of Washington, D.C. I had the honor to speak to the Sustainable Development, the Open Working Group on the Sustainable Development Goals last week, and I basically laid out the problem, and that is that we all here want to proceed with an aggressive and inclusive human development agenda, and yet we're already overutilizing the planetary resources. The usual response to that is, well, we'll simply improve the efficiency of what we do, and then we can have everything. But in fact, over the last few decades, we've been improving the efficiency of how we use nature, but we are becoming more and more unsustainable as we proceed. So I'm wondering if you could make a comment regarding how we can actually put forth policies which keep us within planetary limits. Thank you.
Are you directing your question to Amina in particular?
Maybe the two folks on the left.
Okay, great. I have one more back there, and I have one here, and okay, 1, 2, and that'll be it.
My name is Henrik Nielsen from the Danish NGO Forum. Professor Horst Köhler and a number of other people who have been talking this morning have been denouncing the trickle-down effect as something that has not been working. But at the same time, they seem to be advocating for a growth model which is supposed to create jobs, which I cannot see as significantly different from the trickle-down system of the past. Can you try to elaborate on what the differences between the old and the new model is? Thank you.
Great. Right here.
Thank you. Abdelmanam Abu Nawar from Jordan. And I would like to thank all speakers this morning, all eminent speakers.
Use your mic a little bit more. Yes.
And raise the following point. we have to count those who count, meaning in all constitutions, people are equal, democratic or otherwise. Yet, this is not reflected in national statistics. We need collectively NGOs and governments to advocate for UNDSA, if I might, to consider that statistics ought to show three things. One is the current level, second is the trend, third is the differentials, whether it is geographic within the country, whether it is based on socio-cultural norms or ethnicity. It's only when we appreciate these differences we can achieve progress toward development. On the reducing effect, we are talking about development, social, economic, cultural, whatever, result-based, human-based, gender equity. One thing remains ignored: the reducing effects to development. These we raised in the Arab Human Development Report, which I humbly served as an advisor to. Corruption ought to be in the goals, ought to be monitored. These are the killers to sustainable, equitable, bearable development.
Right.
And thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much. This woman here, and then you.
Hello, my name is Patricia Lerner. I'm with Greenpeace International, and my question's for Amina. There are very few environmental groups that are engaging in the post-2015 debate, and that's troubling. I think part of that may be due to a lack of faith in multilateral processes after the failure of Copenhagen. But more directly relevant to the conversation today, UNEP has identified 90 environmental goals, of which there are only 4 which are seeing significant progress. So why should we tell people to have faith in a system with goals and targets that are purely voluntary?
Good provocative question there, right here. 1 second. There.
My name is Richard Sewakirianga from the Uganda National NGO Forum in Uganda. I have, actually I want to hear Amina's comment on this comment that was made by one of the speakers, that the UN is becoming privatized. It would be interesting to know if, how the UN feels when it hears that characterization. The other thing is to hear a comment from our Archbishop Dube about the rich who do not want to share. You come from South Africa and you know that South Africa has become one of the BRICS, and how it is influencing corporates in Africa is becoming a concern, especially to the less developed countries. And lastly is this whole issue about what do we do with this formulation around how we need to deal with urbanization differently by making sure that it deals with issues of carbon. So I just want to see if you can raise any comments on some of those aspects, because I think they are fundamental to the post-2015 agenda.
Excellent. And I'm going to take the last question here because we've run out of time.
Hi.
Yes.
Hi, hello. My name is Nicole Videgain from Development Alternative with Women for a New Era. I'm very glad that Amina Mohamed raised the financing for development agenda, since I think that we need to tackle the systemic issues, including financial and trade liberalization, debt, precarization of work, cutbacks in social services, that prevents the full realization of human rights and gender justice. So my question is how the high-level panel envisioned to tackle systemic issues in a framework that is based on goals. Thank you.
Okay, since she was so short, I'll let you, sir, do your question.
I want to comment something on...
Just introduce yourself first.
Yeah, my name is Sanka. I'm from Sri Lanka, from the Ministry of Youth Affairs.
Thank you.
But this is a personal comment to Mr. Messenger, if I correctly pronounce it. No. Yes, Messner. in your speech, you said something about inventing things and like sustainable development goals, and then, like how we should prevent the world doubling its energy consumption, and said something about global south. You didn't use the word global south contributing to that doubling, but what I wanted to highlight is that first, in order sustainable development goals to be achieved, whatever forms that we agreed in the future, we need technology transfer from global north to global south, number one. Number two, we don't need to invent every aspect of it, especially in the global south. We have best practices. We know what is best for our countries. We don't need somebody to, like invent something and export it. We can develop our own agendas if we have a framework. So what I want to ask from Amina and also from you is that how this entire process, how do you think it will ensure this indigenous knowledge of global north or global south, it doesn't matter, is put into the heart of this discussion, and it would not end up creating something, like, it would not end up creating something that would be parachuted, but would end up creating something that is, that belongs to the people.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. So there was a lot of questions directed at Amina, so I think I might just go in reverse order and leave you a couple of extra minutes, Amina. So if you have, Archbishop, if you have anything left to say, just to share with some of the clear questions that came to you, very quickly.
I think the first thing I want to say is that some powerful words were said by our keynote speaker, Professor Kohler, in terms of a global structural transformation that will address this whole question of trickle down that has not worked, the whole question where the rich don't want to share. And I think that within that structure, in terms of what I've heard from the citizens of Africa, is giving economic opportunity to the grassroots who are often left out. And secondly, I think we know that Africa is a young continent, and again, Professor Kohler referred to that. And I think that one key aspect, because the post-2015 world is a world of the young, not old fatties like me. And therefore, we need to have in that structural transformation a way in which we realize that the aspiration of the young are realized, and that we harness their energy and their creativity. And that is what we are picking up on the ground.
Beautifully said. Thank you.
I would like just to highlight a few points to wrap up the conversation here. One is, I think, is that there are, of course, many things moving on. We have many examples, good things happening everywhere. We have to give visibility to this. I don't think that we have to be creative in a sense that we have to recreate humanity. No, we have the answers are in our hands, but we don't have political will. We don't have implementation. We have a fantastic framework, but we are at risk because all these rights, everything that we got from all these decades fighting and struggling in favor of human rights, we are losing. Losing because we are in crisis, because the capital want to have all the profit, still have profit, and there is a fight. It seems to be very, very simple, but it's not. It's complex. I know. I live in Brazil, and who lives in a country like Brazil knows how difficult it is to implement a policy to solve poverty. Poverty, we have basket family policy. The Secretary General of United Nations launched in Rio de Janeiro this policy for every country in the world. It helps, of course it helps. It makes everybody consumer, nothing more than consumer. I don't think that it tackles the problem of inequality. Last point, yes. The last point is we need mobilization, public mobilization. We need to increase people on streets, people, consciousness fighting and struggling for a public and commons and many other concepts that we are raising and have already brought in our struggles. And we have to finish this regressive tax system of our country. We have to stop corruption. Yes. We have to stop the exemption mechanism for the big corporations in our country. Absolutely. And we have to finish tax havens. These are
havens, not heavens.
Yes,
but yes,
havens,
yes.
Havens.
I'm going to leave you on that note. Yes. Okay.
Sorry. I was obliged to speak in English. Sometimes.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful.
My effort to speak in English brings some.
Bring that passion into the next workshop.
That's
Thank you.
The point.
I have to cut you off.
Political will and implementation. Please, we have everything done already.
Beautiful. Beautiful. 1 minute.
Only 2 points from my side. The first question is technology the solution? And of course, technology and innovation is absolutely important and key. Urbanization, energy, resource efficiencies, it is important. But beyond that, it is about cultural change, because it is about what we are discussing in all our societies, new wealth concepts and new lifestyles. No? We did studies in many Chinese cities on energy efficiency, and what we found is that you do have a very similar level of income, but very different resource efficiency gains. So it is not about the technologies, it is about the lifestyle in these kind of cities. It is social change. Great transformation implies cultural change at the end of the day. And my second point is, I think the most important shift is that from the sustainability perspective, that we need to accept these limits to development. We need to define these safe space, and then within this space, we can bring technologies in, all our creativity in, and develop globally. But we have to accept these limits. As we already accepted during the last 200 years that there are social limits. We do not accept any kind of development. Exploitation is not accepted. Right. And we need to accept these planetary boundaries, define this space, and then within this space, it's about innovation, it's about technologies, it's about cultural change, new lifestyles, and human creativity.
Thank you very, very much. Amina, it is impossible. And really, this is just a conversation that's starting, so you don't have to answer it all.
Thank you, and I really wanted to do some justice, but it would take quite a bit of discussion to respond to the great questions that came out. I think the major challenge we do have a paradigm shift. President Koller talked about the global agenda. That in itself is about power.
Yes.
And that's going to make the conversation uncomfortable for some, and pretty comfortable for many of us who want the results. On the policy question, you're asking countries now to come back to the drawing board to look at a policy that is integrated. And that in itself is a pretty big challenge. And so I think that in doing that, we have to know they're not starting from scratch. Most countries have got development agendas in place. They're addressing them. They may not be the best ones, and we can go back and we can challenge some of those. But I think that what is very clear is that if you take anything new and keep overloading that burden rather than try to integrate and improve on what is on the ground and get into the post-2015 development agenda from the country level, then we're going to have a complication. I'm concerned that we're just going to be talking about policy level up here, and we're not informing that down here. And I think that that's a big challenge for the consultations. You did ask a question at the beginning, what's civil society's role at this level in country? I think that in country there is a gap. What is the role of international NGOs supporting national civil society in country to take the debate further than just the domain of donors and the UN supporting it, or governments? Because today there are parliaments involved, and those parliaments are critical to results on the ground. This is not just about an executive arm. The executive arm in a democracy that is deepening has to go to the parliaments. What are we doing about that? And parliaments, in a sense, have sort of replaced civil society as representatives of the people. So how can we take the issues and be representative of that and really focus that? And I think that's all part of the policy conversation. Why the UNEP? I mean, really clearly in civil society, I think we need to see a coming together in the same way that we're being asked to bring coherence to the UN agenda. I think even within civil society, if we're saying we're two sides of the same coin, both with the environment, the economy, and the social justice, then we need also to speak to that. Why the goals? Well, for one thing, the MDGs did work. They were not a legal requirement of anybody. But certainly there was international commitment to them. We used them for advocacy, to mobilize, to galvanize, and they happened at country level. Maybe the glass is quarter full or half full, but it's some full. And I think that we need to learn from that and know better how we can go to scale on it. And what was it that worked that made us do that? And I think it was that a lot of the time, what we were asking, first people couldn't argue with it because it's in most constitutions, it is rights-based, and then we looked for a way to leverage action for that. So I think it will matter. Continuing to have goals, critical to the next set will be how we address the targets and the measures. Mm-hmm. We are not going to go the same way. The MDGs did not do well in targeting those differences and the inequalities and specifics around women and children. They didn't measure either for the results. So we have to look at a different set of metrics if we want to try to look at the balance between all those three. In terms of indigenous knowledge, I think, again, if we're not bringing into the post-2015 agenda what is coming from country level, then we will miss that out. And it's the debates at the country level that will inform how far we do that. Education is going through a review of the Delors report, and that's critical. One of the big issues then has been indigenous knowledge, and not to put it as we did with formal and non-formal education, the poor relation in the background. So I think we've got certainly much more on our plates to really engage with. I think everybody is asking how. There's a lot of cynicism about whether this is going to work or not work. I don't think we have the luxury to think about that. I think we have to engage with it, we have to push it, and we have to demand it, because there are millions and billions of people out there who need a development agenda. It is only that will keep the pressure on countries to do better. It is more difficult now because this is going to be a global agenda, and a global agenda means that there is a paradigm shift in the way we do business. We will never do business the same again. And can we make that change over the next 15 to 20 years? Thank you.
Very well done. I hope this panel has whet your appetite for the very participatory sessions that you're about to go into. Please give a round of applause for your phenomenal panelists.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Back to you. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Joanna. And thanks to the panelists. It's been a fascinating discussion. I'm sure we're going to take this further. In fact, I was very tempted to take off my moderator's hat and start commenting on what I've heard. I'll resist doing that. So just a few very quick housekeeping requests and announcements. The first is you would probably look at a picture being drawn here, and this is called graphic facilitators. So we have a team of graphic facilitators. They're working on it, and this has been fantastic. I've seen it in the Berlin Civil Society meetings. You're requested to come and share your thoughts here. The second, we have also designed a harvesting team, and we have 4 members of the harvesting team. Anita Nair from Dawn, maybe they could raise their hands, that would be good. Anita Nair, Roberto Bisio from Social Watch, then we have Manish Joshi, GCCA, and then we have Michael Svitro, GCAP. So they are trying to look at what is a comprehensive narrative across the conversations that we are doing. Again, a conversation with them is encouraged. We also have a feedback wall. You're most welcome to give your feedback there. We'll get a daily bulletin, that's tomorrow and day after, in the morning. And you're most welcome. I don't know how to do the tweeting business, but you're most welcome to tweet us. Okay, so we're really running late. I'm going to request all of you to just pick your coffee, tea, on your way to the workshops. At the last page, the back cover, you have a map of the building, and you'll find your sessions there. Please go early to the session you want, because the space is limited. The moderators and the rapporteurs would be there to welcome you. And finally, we meet here again at 5 in the evening. Thank you. Have a good day.